My family cut me out of the business I helped build, then opened their biggest restaurant on land they did not even realize I owned. By the time they found out, the contracts were already signed, the permits were locked in, and there was nothing they could do to undo it. I am 30 years old now, but everything that led to that moment started long before the grand opening, long before the press releases and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. It started in a kitchen that smelled like garlic and oil, where I spent most of my teenage years working for free while my father told everyone else I was just helping out. My name is Mark. I am the older son, and for most of my life, that meant I was the one expected to carry weight without recognition. My parents built a small restaurant when I was in middle school. It was nothing special at first, just a narrow space with worn tables and a menu that barely changed. But I believed in it. I spent afternoons after school washing dishes, running orders, and eventually helping in the kitchen. Not because I was told to, but because I thought it mattered. When I was 16, I redesigned their entire menu layout. I simplified the offerings, adjusted pricing, and introduced a few dishes that were easier to produce but had better margins. I did not know the word for it back then, but I was optimizing. A few months later, sales improved. My father told customers it was because of his experience. I did not correct him. At 18, I started suggesting expansion ideas. Delivery partnerships, online ordering, branding updates, things that were becoming standard. My father listened, nodded, and then dismissed most of it. He always said the same thing. You are thinking too much. This business runs on instinct. But when my younger brother Ethan turned 18, something shifted. Suddenly, those same ideas were not too much. They were innovative. Ethan did not work in the kitchen. He did not stay late scrubbing floors. He showed up, talked confidently, and repeated ideas I had been bringing up for years. Only this time, my parents listened. They called him a natural. I told myself it did not matter, that we were both contributing, that it was still the same family working toward the same goal. That illusion lasted until I was 22. That was the year we expanded to a second location, or at least that is how the story was told. In reality, I found the location. I ran the numbers, I negotiated the lease terms, I even worked with a contractor to estimate renovation costs. I put together everything they needed to make the decision. When it came time to present it to the bank, I sat in the meeting with them. I thought I would be part of the conversation. Instead, I watched my father introduce Ethan as the future of the company. He spoke for most of the meeting. Ethan filled in the gaps. I sat there quietly, listening to my own work being presented like it came from someone else. Afterward, in the parking lot, I asked him why. He did not even hesitate. Because he has the right energy for this. I remember standing there, trying to process what that meant. Energy. Not effort, not contribution, not results, just energy. That was the first time I understood that this was not about fairness. It was about perception. From that point on, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Ethan was given a salary. I was not. Ethan was listed on internal documents. I was not. Ethan was introduced to partners as an owner. I was introduced as family. I stayed anyway. I told myself I was building something long-term, that eventually it would balance out, that my parents would recognize what I had done. But recognition never came. Instead, one afternoon when I was 24, my father asked me to sit down in the office. It was the same small office we had always used, tucked behind the kitchen. The same desk, the same old chair that creaked whenever someone leaned back too far. He did not waste time. "We have been talking," he said, "and we think it is best if you step away from the business." I thought I misheard him. Step away how? Take some time. Find your own path. This is not really your fit." I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because it did not make sense. I built half of what is here. He looked at me like I was missing the point. "You helped. But helping is not the same as leading." I asked him if Ethan was leading. He nodded. "Yes, and he is doing a great job." That was the moment everything shifted. Not because I was leaving, but because I realized I had never actually been inside the business the way I thought I was. I was convenient. I was useful, but I was never part of the plan. I packed my things that same day. There was not much to take: a few notebooks, some printed spreadsheets, ideas that were never officially mine. No one stopped me. Ethan sent me a message later that night. "No hard feelings. This is just how things needed to go." I did not reply. For a while after that, I stayed quiet. I picked up contract work, mostly consulting for small restaurants that were struggling with operations. It was not glamorous, but it paid enough to get by. More importantly, it gave me distance. Distance from the noise, from the constant comparison, from the feeling that I had to prove something to people who had already decided what I was worth. Over time, I started noticing patterns, the same mistakes, the same inefficiencies, the same missed opportunities. And I realized something simple. The things I had been dismissed for were not wrong. They were just inconvenient for people who did not want to change. I started focusing on commercial properties connected to food businesses, leases, zoning, foot traffic, things that determined whether a restaurant succeeded before the first plate was even served. It was not something I planned. It just made sense. If I could not control the business itself, I could control the ground it stood on. By the time I was 28, I had built a small but stable portfolio. Nothing flashy, just a few strategic properties in areas that were starting to develop. I kept my name out of everything. Limited liability companies, quiet transactions, no announcements. I was not hiding. I just was not interested in being seen. During those years, my family continued to grow their brand. New locations, better marketing, clean branding, the kind of story that looked perfect from the outside. I saw it occasionally online. Articles, interviews, social media posts. One article in particular stood out. "Built from the ground up by a father and his son." I read it twice. There were quotes in that article that I recognized, phrases I had written down years ago in a notebook, ideas I had explained in detail across late-night conversations that no one seemed to remember. Except now they were part of the official narrative. I closed the article and set my phone down. For the first time, I felt something sharper than disappointment. It was not anger, not yet. It was clarity. A few months later, I saw another announcement. They were opening a flagship location. Not just another restaurant, but a statement. Larger space, high visibility, designed to elevate the brand into something more than local. The kind of move that would define the next phase of their growth. I almost ignored it, until I saw the address. Something about it felt familiar. I pulled up the listing and checked the zoning history. Then the ownership records. And that is when everything clicked. 2 years earlier, I had purchased a piece of land in that exact area through a holding company. At the time, it had been overlooked. Old industrial zoning, limited development interest, low price. But there had been a proposed zoning change buried in city planning documents. I had seen it before anyone else cared to look. I bought the land because I knew it would matter later. What I did not expect was that it would matter like this. Their flagship restaurant was being built on property that connected directly to land I owned. They had leased the main lot through a developer, but the surrounding access, the expansion rights, the shared usage clauses. Those were tied to adjacent parcels. Parcels that belonged to me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the documents. They did not know. They had no idea. They were building their biggest investment yet, celebrating it, promoting it, attaching their identity to it, all while depending on land controlled by the one person they had pushed out. I did not act right away. I did not call anyone. I did not send a message. I just watched. Construction began. Progress photos were posted online, updates about design, menu, opening timeline. Everything moved forward like it was inevitable, like there was no scenario where it did not succeed. And then, the invitation arrived. It was not even addressed personally, just a standard card announcing the grand opening event. No note, no message, no acknowledgement. Just a formal invitation, as if I were a distant contact. I held it in my hand, reading the details. Date, time, dress code. I almost threw it away. But something about it made me pause. Not because I wanted to go, but because I realized this was the moment everything would start to change. They thought they were inviting me to watch. They had no idea I was already part of the foundation, and by the time the doors opened, I would not just be a guest. I would be the variable they never planned for. I did not go to the grand opening to celebrate. I went to observe. The event was exactly what I expected. Clean, polished, carefully curated. The kind of environment where every detail was designed to reinforce a narrative. Soft lighting, a curated playlist, servers moving with practiced precision. Everything felt intentional. Everything except me. I walked in without announcing myself. No one stopped me. No one questioned why I was there. To them, I was just another guest, a face that might have looked familiar, but did not matter enough to place. That was fine. I was not there to be recognized. I was there to understand how deeply they had committed to something they did not control. I moved slowly through the space, taking in details. Layout, seating flow, service timing, entry points, emergency exits. Things I had trained myself to notice over the years. Things that told me how a business would function once the excitement of opening night wore off. Ethan was near the center of the room, surrounded by people. He looked comfortable, confident, like he belonged there. My father stood close by, speaking to a group of investors. His posture was straight, his tone measured. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he believed he had built. I watched them for a while before anyone noticed me. It was my mother who saw me first. She did not smile. She walked over, her expression controlled, her voice low enough that no one else would hear. "I did not expect you to come." I held her gaze. "You sent the invitation." She hesitated for a second, then recovered. "That was more of a formality." I almost laughed, but I did not give her that reaction. "So I am here as a formality." Her lips tightened. "Just do not make this uncomfortable." There it was, the same tone, the same quiet attempt to control the situation without acknowledging anything directly. I nodded once. "I am not here to cause a scene." That seemed to relax her slightly, but only on the surface. Underneath, I could see the tension, the uncertainty. She knew something was off. She just did not know what. I moved deeper into the space, eventually stopping near a large window that overlooked part of the exterior lot. From that angle, I could see the edge of the property line. My property line. It was subtle, no visible markers, no signs. Just a boundary that existed on paper, but not yet in reality. That would change. A voice behind me broke my focus. "I did not think you would actually show up." I turned and saw Ethan. He looked exactly the same as he always had. Clean, confident, slightly amused, like everything around him existed to confirm what he already believed. I shrugged. I was invited. He nodded, studying me. "You look different." "So do you." He smiled slightly, but it did not reach his eyes. "Things have been going well?" I glanced around the room. "I can see that." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just empty, like neither of us was interested in pretending there was more to say than there actually was. Finally, he spoke again. "You could have been part of this." I met his gaze. I was. He tilted his head slightly. "Not like this." "No, not like this." We stood there for a moment longer before he was pulled away by someone asking for a photo. I watched him go, then turned my attention back to the window. Everything looked complete, finished, permanent. But I knew better. Nothing about this was as stable as it appeared. The speeches started shortly after. My father spoke first. He stood near the center of the room, holding a glass, his voice carrying just enough to command attention without sounding forced. He talked about hard work, about resilience, about building something meaningful. Then he said the line I knew was coming. This business was built by the people who stayed and believed in it. There was applause. I did not move. I did not react. But something inside me settled into place. Not anger, not even resentment, just a quiet certainty. That was the moment I stopped waiting for anything from them. Ethan spoke next. He kept it short, confident, focused on growth, on the future, on expansion. He mentioned ideas I recognized, systems I had designed, processes I had outlined. He spoke about them like they were discoveries. No hesitation, no acknowledgement, just ownership. I listened until the end, then stepped outside before the applause faded. The air was cooler, quieter, real. I walked along the side of the building, following the edge of the lot until I reached the point where their lease ended and my property began. It looked the same. That was the strange part. There was no visible difference between what they owned and what I controlled. But legally, structurally, everything changed at that line. I pulled out my phone and opened the documents again. Lease agreements, zoning approvals, shared access clauses, all the details that most people never read, all the details that determined who actually had control. That was when I saw it. A clause I had overlooked before, or more accurately, one I had not paid enough attention to. Their lease allowed them to operate the restaurant, but their expansion rights, their external seating plans, their delivery access routes, all depended on adjacent property agreements. Agreements that were not locked. Agreements that could be renegotiated. I stood there, reading through it again, slower this time, more carefully. That was the first real crack, not in their business, in their assumption. They believed this was finished, that everything was already decided. They were wrong. I did not act that night. I went home instead. I sat in my apartment with the documents spread out in front of me, going through every line, every condition, every clause. And the more I read, the clearer it became. They had built something impressive, but they had built it on a structure that depended on stability they did not actually control. Over the next few days, I started making calls, quiet ones. A zoning consultant I had worked with before, a property lawyer who specialized in commercial disputes, an old contact from the city planning office. I did not tell them everything. I did not need to. I just asked questions, hypotheticals. What happens if adjacent access is restricted? What happens if shared usage agreements are reevaluated? What happens if expansion permits are challenged? Each answer pointed in the same direction. Leverage. Not immediate destruction, not dramatic action, just pressure. Controlled. Legal. Strategic pressure. I spent the next week building a timeline. What I could do, when I could do it, what the consequences would be at each step. I was not rushing. I was preparing. At the same time, something else happened. I received an email. It was from one of the vendors listed on the restaurant's opening materials, a supplier I recognized, someone I had worked with years ago. The message was simple. "Hey, I heard you were at the opening. Did not know you were involved with that project." I stared at the screen for a moment. Involved. That word stuck. Because technically, I was, just not in the way anyone understood. I replied with a single line. "I am connected to it more than they think." A few minutes later, he responded. "That makes sense. Something about their setup feels off. They are expanding too fast." I leaned back in my chair, reading that again. Expanding too fast. He was seeing it too, from the outside, without knowing why. That confirmed what I already suspected. This was not just about control. It was about timing. They had moved forward assuming everything would hold, but they had not built in enough margin for disruption. And disruption, when it came from the right place, could unravel everything. That was when I made the decision. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. I was not going to confront them directly. I was not going to argue or demand acknowledgement. I was going to use what I had built. I was going to apply pressure where it mattered, and I was going to do it in a way they could not ignore. I opened my laptop and started drafting the first formal notice. It was not aggressive. It did not accuse anyone of anything. It simply outlined a review of adjacent property usage agreements and a request to revisit certain conditions. On paper, it looked routine, procedural, something that happened all the time in commercial real estate. But I knew what it would trigger. Questions, delays, uncertainty, the beginning of doubt. Before sending it, I paused for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I understood what it meant. Once this started, there was no going back to silence. No returning to the version of myself that stayed quiet and hoped things would change. This was the line, the point where everything shifted. I read through the document one last time, then sent it. And as soon as it left my inbox, I felt it. Not satisfaction, not relief, just a calm, steady awareness. They had built their future on something they did not control. And now, for the first time, I was going to show them exactly what that meant. The first response came faster than I expected. 2 days after I sent the notice, I received an email from a legal assistant representing the development company that had leased the primary lot to my family. The tone was polite, almost dismissive. They framed my request as a routine inquiry, something that could be handled with a quick clarification and a few documents. That told me everything I needed to know. They did not understand the situation yet. More importantly, they had not told my father or Ethan. I did not reply immediately. I let it sit for a full day before responding with a more detailed request. This time, I referenced specific clauses, shared access routes, service lane dependencies, outdoor seating expansion permissions. Each point was precise. Each point required verification, and each point introduced friction. By the end of the week, the tone of the responses had changed. The legal assistant was no longer casual. The emails were longer, more careful. They began asking for additional time to review documentation. They started copying in other departments. That was the second crack. Still quiet, still contained, but growing. At the same time, I moved forward with the next phase. I filed a formal application with the city to review zoning usage on my adjacent parcels. Not a complaint, not an objection, just a request to clarify permitted use under current conditions. On paper, it was routine. In practice, it triggered a chain reaction. City planning flagged the file for review. Inspectors scheduled a visit. Documentation requests were sent to the development company. All of it was procedural. All of it was slow. But all of it created uncertainty. A week later, I saw the first visible sign that something had shifted. A post from the restaurant's social media account. Due to unforeseen circumstances, outdoor seating will be temporarily unavailable. It was a small detail. Most customers would not think twice about it, but I knew exactly what it meant. Their expansion plan had hit resistance. They were adjusting, and they did not understand why. I continued watching. I did not reach out. I did not push further. Not yet. Pressure works best when it builds gradually. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, another call. Then, a message. "Hey, we need to talk." I waited an hour before calling him back. He picked up immediately. "What is going on?" His voice was tight, controlled but strained. I kept my tone neutral. "What do you mean?" "Do not do that. You know exactly what I mean. We are getting legal notices about access and zoning. They are saying there are issues with adjacent property agreements." I leaned back in my chair. "That sounds like something your legal team should handle." There was a pause. Then he said it. "Is this you?" I did not answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because silence forces people to hear what they are already thinking. Finally, I spoke. "I own property next to the site." He exhaled sharply. "You are involved." I chose my words carefully. "I am exercising my rights as a property owner." Another pause, longer this time. "This is not funny, Mark." I did not respond. "You are messing with a major project. Do you understand how much is at stake here?" I let that hang for a second before answering. "I do." That was the truth. I understood exactly how much was at stake. That was why this worked. His tone shifted. "You need to stop this." I shook my head, even though he could not see me. "I am not stopping anything. I am reviewing agreements that affect my property. This is not just about you." I almost smiled at that. It never was. He let out a frustrated breath. "What do you want?" That question mattered. Not because I needed something, but because it meant he had moved from denial to negotiation. I kept my voice steady. "Nothing." That was not the answer he expected. There was silence on the line. Then he spoke again, slower this time. "Then why are you doing this?" I thought about that for a moment. Because for the first time, I actually had an answer. "Because you built something that depends on me, and you never thought to ask." He did not respond. I could hear him breathing, processing. Then the frustration came back. "This is not how you handle things." I ended the conversation there. I am not handling anything. I am letting things play out. I hung up before he could say anything else. That call confirmed what I needed to know. They were aware, but they did not understand the full extent. Not yet. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated. City inspectors completed their review and requested modifications to certain operational aspects. Nothing extreme, just adjustments that slowed things down. Delivery routes were restricted during certain hours. Outdoor service areas required additional permits. Noise regulations were enforced more strictly than before. Each change on its own was manageable. Together, they created friction. Costs increased, schedules shifted, staff had to adapt. Customers noticed. Reviews started to reflect it. Service delays, limited seating, inconsistent experience. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to create doubt. That was the third crack. External pressure, visible, unavoidable. At the same time, I moved forward with something more direct. I reached out to a group of independent food vendors I had worked with in the past. Small operators, flexible setups, people who could move quickly. I offered them short-term leasing opportunities on my adjacent parcels, competitive rates, high visibility, minimal restrictions. Within a week, 2 food trucks were set up along the edge of my property. They were positioned carefully, close enough to benefit from the traffic generated by the restaurant, far enough to remain fully within my legal boundaries. The effect was immediate. Customers arriving at the restaurant saw alternatives before they even reached the entrance. Lines began forming outside the trucks, not because the food was better, but because it was faster, more accessible, more consistent. I drove by one evening and watched from across the street. People standing in line, music playing softly from one of the trucks, a relaxed, informal atmosphere. And behind them, through the glass windows of the restaurant, I could see empty tables. That was the first real visual shift. Not on paper, not in contracts, in reality. A few days later, I received another message, this time from my father. "We need to meet." No greeting, no explanation, just a statement. I did not respond immediately. I let him wait. Then I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant across town. Neutral ground, no connection to the business. He was already there when I arrived. He did not stand up when I approached. He just looked at me. "You are creating problems." I sat down across from him. "I am addressing my property." He shook his head. "Do not play games with me. This is deliberate." I met his gaze. So was everything else. His jaw tightened. "You are hurting the business." I leaned forward slightly. "Which business?" He did not answer that. Instead, he changed direction. "You could have been part of this." There it was again. The same line. The same justification. I let it pass. "You chose to remove me. That was a fact, not an accusation." His expression hardened. "We made a decision based on what was best for the company." I nodded slowly. "And now I am making decisions based on what is best for me." He leaned back, studying me. "This is not going to end the way you think it is." I held his gaze. "It already has." There was a long silence between us. Then he said something I had not expected. "You always thought you were smarter than everyone else." I almost smiled. "No, I just paid attention. That was the difference." I stood up then. "We are done here." He did not stop me. As I walked out, I felt something shift again. Not in the situation, in myself. For years, I had tried to be understood, tried to explain, tried to be seen. Now, I was done with that. This was not about being acknowledged anymore. This was about control. And for the first time, I had it. But I was not finished, because everything I had done so far was just pressure. The real shift had not happened yet, and when it did, there would be no misunderstanding, no denial, no way for them to pretend I was not part of the story. Because the next move would not just affect how they operated, it would affect whether they could continue at all. The next move was not about pressure, it was about exposure. Up to that point, everything I had done could be explained away as coincidence or routine complications, legal reviews, zoning clarifications, market competition. None of it directly tied back to me in a way they could prove. That was intentional. But now they were aware enough to start asking questions and confused enough to make mistakes. And mistakes leave records. I went back through everything I had saved over the years. Old emails, drafts, documents, notes I had written when I was still inside the business. At the time, I kept them out of habit, partly to stay organized, partly because something in me always felt like I might need proof one day. I just did not know when. Now I did. I found the original menu drafts I had created, the pricing models, the supplier structures, even a detailed operational flow I had built for the second location. All of it dated. All of it traceable. More importantly, all of it predated the official versions they were currently using. That alone was not enough to stop them, but it was enough to question ownership. I contacted my lawyer again and laid everything out. Not emotionally, not as a personal story, as a case. Intellectual contribution, documented development, reuse without acknowledgement, potential overlap with current commercial application. He listened, asked a few questions, and then said something simple. This is not clean for them. That was exactly what I needed. We drafted a formal notice. This one was different. It was not about land or zoning. It was about intellectual property. The notice outlined my documented involvement in developing key operational and menu concepts that were now being used in their flagship location. It did not accuse them of theft. It did not threaten immediate legal action. It did something more effective. It raised a question that required them to respond, a question that could not be ignored. We sent it directly to their legal team and copied the development company that was financially tied to the project. Then we waited. 3 days later, I saw the first visible reaction. Another post from the restaurant's social media account. Due to restructuring, certain menu items will be temporarily unavailable. It was subtle, but I knew what it meant. They had received the notice. They were reviewing their position, and they were not confident. That same afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, it was not Ethan. It was my father. I answered. His voice was different, less controlled. What are you doing? I kept my tone even. Reviewing documentation. Do not play with me. You sent a legal notice. Yes. There was a pause. Then he said it. You are trying to take this from us. I leaned back slightly. No, I am showing you that you never fully had it. Silence. Then frustration. This is your family. I did not respond immediately, because that word had lost its meaning a long time ago. Finally, I spoke. Family does not erase people. He exhaled sharply. You are going too far. I shook my head. No, I am just not staying small anymore. He hung up. That conversation marked the shift, not because it changed anything legally, but because it changed how they saw me. I was no longer irrelevant. I was a problem. Over the next few weeks, everything accelerated. The development company began asking questions. Investors requested updates. Internal reviews were conducted. Every part of their operation was being examined more closely. And when businesses are examined under pressure, inconsistencies surface. Minor issues became larger concerns. Delays turned into costs. Costs turned into risk. At the same time, the food vendors on my property continued to grow. More trucks joined. A small outdoor seating area formed naturally around them. It was not planned, it just happened. People preferred it. It felt easier, more relaxed, more real. And slowly, the balance shifted. The flagship location was no longer the center of attention. It was just another option. That was when the final step became clear. Not destruction, resolution. I reached out to the development company directly. This time, I did not ask questions. I made an offer. A buyout of the full commercial block. Land, operational rights, and existing lease structures. It was below their projected long-term value, but above what they could comfortably sustain under current conditions. They did not respond immediately. They reviewed, they calculated, they weighed the risk of continuing against the certainty of exiting. 2 weeks later, they accepted. The transition was quiet. No announcements, no public statements, just paperwork. Ownership changed, control shifted, and the structure that had supported the flagship location was no longer theirs to rely on. Ethan called me the day he found out. His voice was not angry this time. It was something else. "You bought it?" "Yes." "Why?" I thought about that. "Because I could." He was silent for a moment. Then he said something that stayed with me. "You really did not need us." I did not answer that, because the truth was more complicated than that. I had needed them once, just not anymore. The restaurant did not close. I did not force them out. That was never the goal. But everything changed. Their costs increased. Their flexibility disappeared. Their ability to expand was gone. They stayed, but they were no longer in control. A few months later, I restructured the entire area. The food vendors became permanent. We built a shared dining space, flexible seating, open concept, independent operators working side by side. It grew into something better than what had been there before, not because it was bigger, but because it was not built on exclusion. I kept my name off of it. No branding tied back to me, no public connection, just quiet ownership. One evening, I drove past the property again. The lights were on. People were gathered outside, talking, eating, moving freely between spaces. It felt alive, different from what it had been before, simpler, more honest. I stayed in the car for a few minutes, watching. Then I left. A week later, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. I did not realize what I was losing until I saw what you built without us. I read it once, then folded it carefully. There was no apology, no explanation, just a statement. And for the first time, that was enough. Not because it fixed anything, but because I did not need it to. I put the letter away and closed the drawer. The story was not about winning. It was about understanding. Understanding that control does not come from being included. It comes from knowing your value and deciding where to place it. They had built something without me, and in the process, they made me invisible. I built something without them, and this time, there was no way to ignore it.